Everyone? Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Brown County Superior Court now back in session. God save the state and all the court. You may have a seat.
They record your pledge to your action before anything record state.
Nothing on behalf of the state, Your Honor.
Hey, record.
No, sir.
Sheriff, you may invite you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. We thank you for coming back being with us today. Any further evidence on behalf of the defendant?
Yes, sir. The defense calls,
Gregory Jurek.
Do you solemnly swear that evidence you should be with the court and the jury should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
good morning, Mr. Sheriff.
Good morning.
If you could state and spell your name.
Gregory Jurek. Spell it. Gregory. Middle initial R. Jurek.
Thanks, sir. And how do you know Mr. Eric Campbell?
I know Eric through my sister, who was his mother.
And so are you his uncle?
I'm his uncle. He's my nephew.
And are you currently employed?
Yes, sir.
And what do you do?
I'm what they call an ICE technician. I do instrumentation, controls, and electrical at a power plant.
And if we can start, I know that you knew Eric's mother from a very, from when you were kids. If we could just kind of start when you learned about Ed Campbell and your sister being in a relationship.
Well, when I first actually found out about it, my sister was on her way down from,
Objection to the relevance,
That's
Judge.
the day.
yes, you heard.
Sure, ladies and gentlemen, I'll excuse you to the jury for just a few moments while they don't discuss this case. Let me say, should you forward express your opinion about the issue of this trial during this time. That's yours. Excuse me. You may ask your questions. We'll let you expose for the record.
Thank you. When did you first learn that your sister and Mr. Ed Campbell were in a relationship?
Again, my sister called me when she was on her way down from being married, and she wanted to come by the house to introduce Ed. And
These times specific.
Yes, when was that? Were they married in 1988?
yes, so that was in '88. Don't know what month. That's a while back. So they came down, visited. The first night when they got there, it went okay. After that, while I was working with the city of Austin at the time, and this was in Austin, my wife had called, said him and my sister were not acting appropriately at my house. So I got home that next day and talked to them both, and they were acting kind of like strong newlyweds, I guess, best way to put it. Anyway, next day, same thing happened, so I asked them to leave.
And what were your impressions of Edward Campbell at that time?
My impressions were he was very strong-willed. Always had an excuse for doing what he did, and wouldn't listen.
And when was the next time you saw Edward Campbell and his sister Valerie?
The next time I saw them both, well, I guess is when they actually, when I saw Valerie. I didn't see Ed. I saw Valerie when they buried Michelle.
And when was that? If you could describe what happened related to that.
Well, they said that they were living in Florida at the time, and they said Michelle had passed away from SIDS. I'm not going to go into what I really feel about that one, but anyway, my sister wanted her to be buried in a place where she could come see her. So my parents had a plot. They came up there, and well, it flew her up there. My sister was there, and they buried her.
Did Ed Campbell come to the funeral?
I did not see him.
And how did your sister take the death of her child?
She took it very hard, very hard.
Now, at some point, did Ed and the children come to live with you?
Yes,
And was that at around 1995?
yes, sir.
So Eric was born in 1993. He would have been around 2 years old.
He was very young. Nicholas was a year older than my son, so they got to play around. And my wife at the time, she did a really good job of taking care of Eric, while Ed worked on getting a job.
And why did they come to stay with you?
I am not sure why they were leaving Florida. I know they left my sister behind to complete working where she was at, and my understanding was, I'm not sure, that they just supposedly wanted to be closer to family.
Was Ed working in Florida?
I'm not sure.
And when he was at your house, about how long did they stay at your house?
About 1 month.
And did you see anything that concerned you regarding Mr. Ed Campbell during that time?
As far as, I did notice when I was, so we set him up a little computer room in our utility room. As you come in through the garage, you would see it. As I walked through, I noticed he was working on some documentation, and it had a nursing certificate that he was actually trying to change the date on to make it look like it was more current than it was. So the one that he had was actually expired.
And what impressions did you have of Ed Campbell during that time when you were staying with you?
He just had no resolve for anybody else. He just, he had to be reminded he was living in my house, my rules, and there needs to be some respect there going both ways. My main focus was not on him, it was more on the kids.
And what were the kids like?
The kids were good, very good. Seemed scared, but always okay.
What do you mean they seemed scared?
Oh, when Ed spoke, they jumped.
And how did Ed interact with the children? Did you witness him interact with his kids?
Not a whole lot. I was working a lot of time, but the interaction, he was more focused on the computer than he was on his kids. He just, after a while, he made sure they got to the table when we got called for dinner, and he made sure they had good manners.
Now, at some point after he moved out of your house, do you know where he and the kids went after they left your house?
Yes, they went and moved to Hewitt, and they stayed there for, I believe, about 6 months. We went and saw them on occasions. It was great to see them. We'd bring kids over, of course, and my wife, she had, over that month period, she really got close to Eric. So.
Now, at some point, did they move to Brownsville?
Yes, sir.
And did there come a time when you learned that your sister had a medical problem?
Yes. While I was at work, I got a phone call. I don't remember exactly what date, but it was in '97. I went by and picked up my parents and drove them down to Brownsville. We went and checked on Valerie. She was in the hospital, and a little disappointed to find out there was no insurance available because Ed had lost his job. So for what reason, I don't know. It just, they did not seem, there was no urgency around my daughter's care, put it that way.
And what was the house like in Brownsville?
Yeah, it was a very old 2-story house. I remember when I drove up, there were bees flying out of the top of it, so they had an attic full of bees. You go inside, there's a few bees flying around. You sit down on an old sofa, and scorpions were on the floor. It was a very tough environment. I was surprised they were staying there.
And did you interact with Ed and the children during that visit?
Yes, I did, quite a bit. Trying to find out exactly what had happened with my sister, trying to get more details. It was he kept changing the subject about what was going on with her to what was, what happened to her to what was going on with her. So we were trying to find out, me and my dad were trying to find out, hey, how did this all happen? He said she got a headache, and it just got worse, so he took her to the hospital. Kids didn't say anything about it, and he was just trying to tell the doctors and the nurses what to do up at the hospital. So that was him.
Now, at some point, did your parents take custody of Val?
Yes, they did.
And do you know around when that was?
Not off the top of my head, sir. No, sorry.
Was it a few years after?
Yes, absolutely.
What were the circumstances around them getting custody of Val?
Circumstances were the nursing home called my parents. They said that my sister had been taken off all medication, and at this rate she had about a week to live. Me and my parents went down, picked her up, brought her back, and then my parents started to get with Ed to get an executor rights.
Did Ed ultimately agree that they could have custody?
Yes, he said he'd agree if they would leave the DNR in place.
And what was the DNR?
Do not resuscitate.
Now, after you and your family took back custody of Val, did you continue to visit with Ed and the children?
No, could not keep up with him, and he would just pop in every once in a while, would really not let us know what's going on.
And when he did contact you, what was the reason for him contacting you?
Usually money or support.
Did you want to see the children, or did you like Eric?
Oh, yes.
Do you have children?
Yes, I have 3 children.
And when they were growing up, did they see your parents regularly?
Yes.
Did your parents want to be involved in their life?
Oh, yes. They continue to.
So, what were your overall impressions of all your dealings with that community?
Well, To me, it seemed like everything Ed touched, it's turned negative. I mean, I really look at it as they had a baby, Michelle. She died. My sister had her aneurysm, and now Eric's on trial. It just all very negative. I'm just happy to see Nick doing okay.
Was he hard to be around? Was it hard to spend time with it?
Yes. Yes.
Would you let him, take your children to
Oh,
the zoo
no.
or something like that?
No, not unless myself or my wife was with them.
And why wouldn't you let him do that?
Parental instincts. I don't know. I just didn't trust the guy. Put it that way.
That would be our offer this time.
Your Honor, I just renewed my objection. None of this is relevant.
Yes, Your Honor, this is relevant in a couple different ways. One, it can it corroborates some of the things that Mr. Campbell testified to as to the instability in his home, the relationship, the difficulty it is to deal with his father. Also, interviews that were conducted with Mr. Gregory Jurek were provided and relied upon by Dr. Hagan and his testimony. We have a right to prove up and corroborate those things that were provided and relied upon by our experts. It goes to the dynamic between Eric Campbell and his father, and what kind of person that Ed Campbell was. And it also goes to how Ed Campbell isolated his children from their family and how they didn't have access to other appropriate adults for much of their time.
Your Honor, if I understand Mr. Jurek's testimony, he hasn't had any contact with Ed and his family since 1997. That's when the his parents, I believe, took over guardianship of his sister, and they lived in their household for 1 month when Eric was 2. And there's just nothing in here that is relevant of the issue at hand. There is nothing that tends to make the facts of consequence more probable or less probable because of his testimony. And because of that, that is not at all relevant. It's not probative into any fact that's here. What his speculation is as to what happened to Michelle or Valerie or anybody else is just speculation and also not at all admissible. What his parents said is hearsay. What a nursing home said is hearsay. There is nothing in his testimony that offers anything in this trial.
Sustain.
All right, Your Honor, we note our objection for the record, and we'll have some additional questions when the jury comes back.
You can bring the jury in, please.
You testify, you're Eric Campbell's maternal uncle, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did there come a time in 2001 where you received a call relating to the Department of Social Services investigation?
Yes.
And what was the circumstances of surrounding that?
The circumstances were that, well, Ed actually called me himself and said his children.
As to what Edward Campbell said to him.
Sustain.
So Mr. Ed Campbell called you, is that correct?
Yes.
And after that conversation, did you do anything related to a court hearing?
Yes.
What did you do?
Me and my wife drove down to Houston to go to court.
And what kind of court hearing was it that you went to?
I don't know what you would call it, but a lady said she got beat up and pressed charges.
What a lady said.
Right?
I don't know how
Was
to
the
explain it.
nature of the proceeding you went to related to criminal violence?
Yes.
Related to Ed Campbell?
Yes, it was.
And why did you go to that hearing?
In case, I don't know how to explain it because she's going to say no.
Well, I mean, were you prepared, were you worried about what was going to happen to the boys?
I was very concerned what was going to happen to the boys, and Ed had no contact with the children, so that's why I was there.
And were you prepared to take
Yes.
the boys home with you if necessary?
Yes, sir.
Is that why you went to that
That's the only reason why.
court hearing? And when it was over, did the boys come back and live with you?
No, sir.
And do you know why?
They dropped the charges, so they went back to Ed.
And that was in 2001.
Yes, sir.
After that, did you see Eric or his brother again?
No.
And do you know, did your parents see them again?
My parents did see Nick and Eric a couple of times since then. They would drop by to see my sister and visit my parents.
Did your parents see your children regularly?
Objection.
Right?
Do you know, was your parents' relationship with your children any different than it was with, as far as frequency of visits, with your children compared to Eric and his brother?
Yes.
And did they see them less or more often?
They saw my children and my brother's children quite often.
And did you want to see Eric and his brother?
Yes.
After 2001?
Yes.
And why didn't you?
There was no contact with Ed.
And why wasn't there?
Objection.
I didn't answer that.
Why didn't you see Eric and his brother? Why didn't you talk with Ed?
Well, it's a two-way street when you communicate with people, and I always asked him when I did see him to keep in communication, and the only time he would call is when he needed something. I would never get a phone number or anything.
When you say needed something, what do you mean by that?
Money or support.
When you would interact with Ed Campbell, what were your impressions of him?
Objection.
Right?
Did you enjoy interacting with Ed Campbell?
Objection.
Right?
Well, where do you live now?
I live in Belton.
And where is that?
It is 20 miles from Waco.
Is that in Texas?
Yes, sir. It
Did
is
you
in
travel
Texas.
from Texas to come here today?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Which was that?
I don't have any questions.
Thanks, sir. You can stand down. So the evidence has been.
Yes, Your Honor. The defendant will call Linda Lamont.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. You solemnly swear the evidence you should give the court and the jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Ms. Lamont.
Good morning.
If you would state and spell your name for the court reporter.
Oh, yes, sir. Linda Lamont. It's Linda, and it's capital M-O-T-T-E, Lamont,
And Ms. Lamont, where do you currently live?
in Ennis, Texas.
And what do you do? What are your days like?
Currently, I'm a housewife, enjoying getting acquainted and living in the small town, moving from a big city.
Now, do you know Eric Campbell?
Yes, sir, I do.
And did he live with you in 2000, 2001?
Actually, I lived with them.
You lived with him. And who else lived in the home when you lived with him?
I moved in with the two boys, Nicholas and Eric, Ed, and his wife, Valerie.
And what was Valerie's physical condition at that time?
She was bedridden. She just stayed in a room on a waterbed and needed 24-hour monitoring and care.
Now, during the time that you lived with Ed Campbell and his children, did you ever see Ed Campbell commit any act of violence against Eric Campbell?
Yes, sir.
If you could describe for the jury.
Hold on a second.
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, ma'am. If you could tell the jury what you witnessed as far as Ed Campbell being violent towards Eric.
The first time, I wasn't sure why, but I saw Ed grab Eric, and he was probably 8 years old, or 7 or 8, and he tossed him up in the air and snatched him by his feet or his ankles and jolted him around and then slung him across the room, probably a good 12, 15 feet, and he slammed up against the upper part of the couch where you relax your back. And the whole couch fell backwards to the ground. And Nick was sitting on the couch, and I ran around, checked on him, and I was told to get back and leave him alone.
Is that the only time you ever saw Ed Campbell assault Ed?
No. There were other times the boys had to march like soldiers, and if they got out of place, he would take his middle finger and like make a bump, pounce on their head. So they needed to, be at attention.
Did Eric and his brother, did they pay attention to their father? Did they do what he would tell them?
Yes. They were, as soon as they would hear his voice, they would jump and come immediately to come to attention to find what they're needed for.
Did they appear scared of their father?
Objection to the leading.
Oh.
When how did they interact with their father, and what was your impression of how they acted, how they felt?
Well, they were.
Calls for speculation.
I'm there, keep saying
They Eric especially was very frightened when he'd hear his dad call him. He would wet his pants and sometimes have a bowel movement, and his we had a huge plastic container for him filled with diapers, and an 8-year-old boy, going on, I was there, lived with him several years, so it was embarrassing for him. It was very humiliating. you know, as long as I was around him, he promised me he would be fine and he wouldn't wet. But his dad worked the night shift, so sometimes before his daddy'd come home, I'd have to, ask him, if he wanted a diaper, how he felt, and sometimes we would have to put a diaper on him.
Did you like Eric?
Oh, yes. Yes, I love the boys. They called me Mom. They told their friends, introduced me as, Mom, this is my mom. And so, I would take them out. I'd go jog and they'd ride their bicycles. And so we grew a bond. He was a very good boy. Both, all the kids were. Fell in love with Valerie, too. She's adorable. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Now, during the time you were living with Ed Campbell and his children, was Ed Campbell ever violent towards you?
Objection.
Sustained.
Were you scared of Ed Campbell?
Very much so. Very much so. It was a unusual relationship. It wasn't a willing.
Objection, non-responsive.
Oh,
Any other question, please?
Why were you afraid of Ed Campbell?
if I didn't do like the boys did, if I didn't come to attention, he would snatch me by my neck or pinch on my arms.
How born and let him be.
Yes, sir.
So if you just tell us why were you afraid?
He was violent. Very violent.
And what kind of things? At some point, did you decide to leave Ed Campbell?
I tried many times. It was very difficult, and I couldn't. We didn't have phones. He could take the cords. We couldn't use the phone. I couldn't leave. I couldn't visit family. If I tried to leave, he'd almost kill me.
Objection.
Go on.
At some point, did you take out charges against Ed Campbell?
Yes, sir.
What happened that led to those charges being taken? And that before you answer, was that in 2001? If you know.
I'm not sure. There was so many incidences that
But
I
there
went
was
to the
a
police.
time that you took charges.
There was a time that the police said it was enough.
And what happened that resulted in those charges being taken? What did they do?
Objection.
Right?
And after you took charges out against him, is that when you left him?
Yes, I'd tried, and he would follow me. I got a job, and I didn't know it, but he was following me to my job and got onto my computer. And
Objection.
Right?
And after you left him, did you continue to have contact with Eric and his brother then?
I tried, yes.
And were you able to see them all?
No, actually, I had to call their school counselors and go through, use a resource to make sure that their welfare was going to be somehow looked over before I actually had to step away from them. So I did, make sure that, because it was difficult.
And once you left Ed Campbell, I mean, it had been years since you'd seen Eric. Was that a yes?
Yes, sir, I'm sorry, yes.
Now, during the time that you were in a relationship with Ed Campbell, do you recall going to Mexico?
Yes, yes, I do.
On the drive back from Mexico, was there an incident in which Ed Campbell had an incident with another driver?
Yes, he had a confrontation with a driver who had, I guess we collided vehicles.
And what happened
Change
after?
the relevance, Judge.
That's all right. Go on.
And what happened after y'all collided?
He called out,
And by he,
Edward called out to the boys about something, and they handed him a big silver rod, and he opened the car door and jumped out with that rod, and I heard something like a bell, and I realized that there were quite a few men coming, so I jumped in the back of the van and grabbed the boys, and we ran up to the American consulate side, and I had, was carrying Eric.
so after you heard that noise, did you see that anyone was injured?
No, I didn't want to look. I ran.
And were you afraid?
Very afraid.
And was Eric afraid?
Yeah,
Sustained.
Did Eric appear afraid?
the boys were very frightened.
And after that happened, what happened next? After you took the boys and ran from there?
The American consulate held us with the police officers, and they somehow let Ed pass to the Mexican side, and they kept us apart until they could figure out what was going on, and let me make a phone call, and the boys apparently ran off with Ed, but I could see money, a big chunk of money, and he was giving money to the Mexican police officers.
And after that happened, did y'all end up getting back in the van and continuing the trip home?
Yes. We continued on, went to the church, and it was their spring break, so we went ahead and went to Corpus and then went home.
Now, the period of time you lived with Ed Campbell, was that a traumatizing period of time for you? Did that have any effect on you, the period of time you spent with Ed Campbell?
Yes, it still affects me.
And how
Yes.
does it still affect you?
I can't breathe sometimes when I talk about it. I get like high blood pressure, upset. I can't have relationships. It's just been, it changed my life.
Thank you, ma'am.
Finish, Ms. Dave.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Lamont,
Yes, ma'am.
was your name Linda Cook when you were dating Mr. Campbell?
Yes, it was. Yes, ma'am.
And Texas DSS contacted you while you were Ed Campbell's girlfriend, is that correct?
Yes.
And you specifically told them that you had no concerns about Mr. Campbell abusing or neglecting the children, isn't that correct?
No, ma'am.
So when they went into custody with Child Protective Services back in 2000, you didn't speak to an Emerald Linda Espinoza when she called you as a collateral contact of information?
I thought it was a man contacting me, but those questions were asked. I called them and asked them because the boys were out of school, and I was concerned about what should I do about their schooling. And they said, don't worry, that he was out of custody or something, that for me, that I should take him home.
And in fact, you agreed that you would care for them at all times when Mr. Campbell was at work, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you never made any report to anybody from Texas DSS about any abuse that you saw in the home?
only to the police officers and the school counselors.
When did you make a report to the school counselor?
I think when I started figuring out that things weren't right.
When was that?
Maybe 2002 or
So,
somewhere around in there. It's been a while. But I told quite a few people, I told the police officers quite a few times, but they told me there was nothing that can be done until he killed somebody.
Ms. Lamont, you became involved in this case because you saw it and you contacted the attorneys, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You contacted the media?
The who? I'm sorry.
The media?
Media? I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
You also contacted the media about wanting to talk to somebody about this case. Is
Oh,
that
yes,
correct?
yes, ma'am. Actually, they contacted me through email, and I
I
was.
don't have anything further, Your Honor.
Be right.
No question.
Thank you, ma'am. You stay there.
Thank you.
Brother Anderson,
Yes, Your Honor, we would call Christy Davis.
Do you solemnly swear that evidence you should give to the court and the jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Ms. Davis.
Good morning. Sorry.
And how old were you when he lived with you?
I was a sophomore in high school, so I was 14 or 15. 15, I think.
Do you have any idea about what year that was?
It would have had to have been 2001, 2002.
And what were the circumstances under which Eric Campbell came to live with you?
Well, actually, Ed showed up at our house with his van full of apartment. I guess he had got kicked out of apartments. My mom.
So Ed Campbell showed up at your house with a van. Could you tell us what all he had when he showed up?
Well, you know, he had all the contents of wherever he had just come from in his van, and he told my mom he needed a place to live. And they had been on, 2 dates, so it was a bizarre thing. Anyways, that he came to do that. But of course, she had a bleeding heart, and he had the 2 kids, and she didn't want to turn them away because of the 2 boys.
Now, at that time, what was your situation? Were you living full-time with your mom?
At that time, I was living full-time with my mom, yes, sir.
And did you ever, during the time that Ed Campbell and the children lived with your mom, did you ever stay anywhere else?
Yes, I went and I stayed with my dad for a while.
And what were your impressions of Ed Campbell?
Objection.
Your Honor, that's correct.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll excuse you to the jury for just a few moments while they don't discuss this case among yourselves. Did you inform or express an opinion about this case during this time? That's your excuse. You may ask your question.
Ms. Davidson, what were your impressions of that?
My impressions of Ed is that he just was, he just wasn't normal. He was not what anybody would define as normal. I had a group of, I mean, everyone who came into contact with him almost immediately identified him as, I don't know if I can say this, we said crazy. We called him Crazy Ed.
And did it make you uncomfortable to be around him?
Yes, sir.
And is that part of why you went and lived with your dad for a period?
Yes, sir.
Were you ever afraid of him?
Yes, sir.
No, that would be my problem.
You have a question?
Not relative to that, I mean, something is relative to the issue in this case. It's not to me.
Your Honor, the fact that people would interact with Ed Campbell and have a reasonable fear of him is relevant to whether or not Mr. Campbell, when he interacted with his father, would have a reasonable fear of him. Her experiences of her, what she saw of Ed Campbell and what her impressions are relevant to the situation in this case.
How old were you when this occurred?
How old was I? I was 15, 16.
Objection's done. Bring it in.
Did you have a family dog at the time that Campbell and his children lived with you?
Yes, sir.
What was the name of that dog?
She was a black lab, named Groovy.
And did anything happen to the group to, can you say that again?
Her name's Groovy, like Groovy. Yeah.
Did anything happen to Groovy while Ed Campbell was living in your home?
Objection, relative.
After Ed Campbell left your home, did Groovy still live with him?
No, sir.
Objection, relative.
Go on.
Do you recall a time when your mom wanted Ed Campbell to be out of the home?
Yes, sir.
If you could tell us about, was there an incident where you had a conversation with Ed about that?
Objection.
Explain.
Do you recall, if you could tell the jury about your mom asking Ed to leave the home?
Objection.
No?
No, I'm asking her.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll excuse you back to the jury room. You know the rules. Yes, sir.
Do you recall a time when your mom asked Ed Campbell to leave the home?
Yes, sir.
Was there an incident in the hallway of your home?
Yes, sir.
If you would tell us about that.
Well, we were aware of the fact that she had told him to leave.
Sorry, when you say we, who do you mean?
My brother and my sister. And he was going to go back to her bedroom, I guess, even after she had told him to leave. And we were just teenagers telling that we're like, get away from our mom, get out of here. She told you to leave, now go. So we were in the hallway, and he was being very scary that day. He called me names that traumatized me for the rest of my life. He said, get out of the way. Can I say it all? Okay. You fucking ugly cunt.
How did you feel when he said that?
you know, obviously not, I didn't feel good, but, you know, it was shocking to hear an adult tell me that.
An adult ever said anything like that to you before?
Of course not.
And what happened after that?
After that, he somehow managed to get in my mom's room, and that was the moment whenever, you know, things became really tense because we didn't know what was going to happen, so we were ourselves very scared because he was mad and he was, you know, crazy.
What happened?
So,
Did you hear anything from inside the room once he was in the room? with
right. So once he was in the room, my mom basically told us to stand back, to be quiet because he had a gun.
She said, what did she actually say?
She just told us to be quiet. He has a gun.
And what did you think when you heard that?
I thought we're all going to die.
Were you afraid?
Yes.
Now, after that, at some point did it move out of the room?
At some point he did, after my mom trying to get him out of the house for a long time. And okay. And like I said, my mom was trying to get rid of him, but also so worried about the boys. She was super worried about the boys, and he manipulated my mom with the boys. I mean, he knew that, you know, they wouldn't have a place to live.
No, that was no problem on this issue.
Ms. Davis, you had a meeting with Zach Rolls from the Capital Defender's Office,
Yeah, yes.
and did you ever tell him about the incident regarding this gun?
The hallway?
Yes.
Yeah. How, I mean, I said that he was in the room with my mom, and she said that, you know, she was trying to make us stop talking because she didn't want to escalate the situation.
But, so you're telling us that you told him that?
I don't know if I told him. I've spoken with Zach many times because, you know, memories are weird. So I don't know what I told him the initial time I spoke to him, but things came back to me. I mean, it's a period I try to block out of my mind, but like little by little things came back to me with vibrantly. So I don't know how to explain memory, but it wasn't, I mean, it was never intentionally, like I was, you know, nothing intentional as far as omitting or.
You weren't inside the room, were you?
I was not inside the room, no, sir.
Your Honor, renew my objection. First on Melton, second on hearsay. It's obviously what it is. She was not there, she's not a witness to it.
Well, certainly if the mom's in the room with a maniac and she says he's got a gun, that's a present sense of impression that would be an exception to the hearsay rule. But more importantly, this is about the things that Ms. Davison saw and experienced and the fear that she had, was a reasonable fear of Ed Campbell. And also, some of her information was provided to experts in this case who provided for him there.
Your Honor, she very well may have had a reasonable fear. I'm not doubting her credibility as to that issue. The issue is not what her sense and what she was experiencing. The issue is what this man over here, and his intentions and his state of mind at the time, and what she thought does not go to that. It is way more prejudicial than is probative on any issue relative to that. And again, Your Honor, we would ask that we just don't believe this is relevant to the issue here.
Your Honor, I would say two things. One, the chaotic situation of Mr. Campbell's childhood is a basis for the experts' opinions, and the state's expert in this case has directly challenged that and says that there is, you know, inconsistent evidence on that point, and we have a right to prove those things to the jury so that they can understand all the facts when they're evaluating the different experts' opinions. And we do expect the state to offer Dr. Bush's testimony and rebuttal, although obviously we won't have that until that happens.
Sustained. Right here. Things would-
At some point, did Ed Campbell eventually move out of your home?
At some point, did he eventually move out of my home? Yes, sir.
And after he moved out, did it change anything about where you wanted to live?
Objection.
Yeah.
Yes, I immediately went back to my mom's
From your dad's house?
from my dad's.
And after they moved out, did you stay in contact with, or did you or your family stay in contact with their brother?
I know that my mom and I wondered about them. I don't know if she formally tried to ensure that they're, that they were okay. But we definitely wondered and worried about them.
I don't have any further questions.
Witness, that,
Thank you.
No question.
name you stand there. Yes, sir, for this? No.
Around this time, we would call Shane Warman.
Question of time by Ayesha. Do you solemnly swear that evidence you should give before the jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
State your name and spell your name, please.
Shane Warman, SHANE WARMAN.
And how are you currently employed?
I'm an AV technician. I do commercial and residential security and home theater systems.
And are you married or single?
Yes, I'm married to Jennifer Warman.
You don't have any children?
2 children.
And where did you travel from to come to work?
Iowa.
And do you live in Iowa?
No, sir.
Why did you travel here from Iowa?
I'm remodeling a Menards there, sir.
Now, how do you know Eric?
I grew up with Eric. He was my closest and best friend.
And when did you meet him?
Around when I moved to Alvin when my parents were divorced, I was 5 years old. When we moved there, and I met him when I was 7 to 8 years old when they arrived at Indian Acres.
And how close did y'all live to each other?
I lived right behind his house.
And were y'all friends just when you were children or for longer than that?
All the way up until this all had happened.
Did you ever go to Eric Campbell's house?
Many times. Spent the night.
And when you were a young child and seeing Eric, elementary school, middle school age, what was that like? How did you see him?
I'm not sure what.
What were the circumstances under which y'all would meet or see each other?
Oh, well, I met him when they were tearing down a chicken coop behind their house, and that was the first time I had seen Eric, and our friendship had grown after that. We would play computer games, stuff like that. He would come stay at my house. I would go stay at his. We spent a lot of time together. We were just playing as children friends.
Now, you say you stayed at his house. Was that something that happened right away when you were young?
No, sir.
And how did that change over time?
After a while of Ed seeing me and becoming comfortable enough to allow me to come over there, it was about a year of me being friends with Eric before I was allowed to come over or stay or anything like that.
Did lots of other kids come over and stay?
No, sir.
Objection.
Oh.
Now, At any time, did you become aware that Ed Campbell was abusing Eric?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Can you tell us about how you became aware of it?
Eric would describe certain incidents that would go on. Would you like me to go into detail of those? Or?
Yeah, if you would tell us about
He told me about times of him stomping on his head.
You say him stomping on his head.
Ed stomping on Eric's head. When Eric was not obedient or did what he was told, there were times when Ed would get angry and he'd just flip out. If anyone was present, he would send them away. He'd punch holes in the walls, kick holes in the walls, throw furniture, break things.
I'll object to him as a time.
Need to be specific this time.
Yes, sir. Well, when did Eric Campbell tell you these things?
All throughout growing up. 8 to 9 years old, he when we began to get a lot closer because we didn't have any other friends. Eric would go into detail of just the mental, the physical, and the emotional abuse.
Did you ever see Ed and Eric interact?
Many times.
And what was Ed Campbell like?
Very aggressive and confrontational and demanding.
And what do you mean by that? If you could give us some examples.
He would scream loud if you didn't do what he said. He would get up in your face to the point where when he spoke, he would spit on you. That was how Ed was. He's aggressive.
Now, did there ever come a time when you became aware that Ed was making methamphetamine?
Yes, sir.
Objection.
If you would tell us how you became aware that he was making methamphetamine.
He was having his children make it. He also used it to make them work harder and to work better. He treated his children like a slave force. He made them do things. He would make them go in there and make it, and then he would make them take it so that they could work longer, work harder, and they could get more done. When I worked for him while he was concreting and building the in-ground pool in the backyard.
And about how old would you have been when you were working for him doing that?
Anywhere all the way up from 16 to 18 years old. He offered me some because I was making $12 underneath the table. I was working 8 to 10 hours on that pool so long as there was daylight. And after toting 5-gallon buckets full of concrete, and just concrete is a brutal job itself, he offered it to me, and he told me that it would make me work better, and then I would take it, and I would have energy to last throughout the day. I wouldn't need to take lunch breaks or anything like that. My body would just power through.
Did you ever actually physically see him make methamphetamine?
Yes, sir, I did.
And how did he do that?
The process was quite complicated. He had to buy Sudafed, a prescription that you're only allowed to buy 3 times a month, and he had different people purchase this for him because of that limit, and then he would take this pill, break it down, and because he had the nursing experience, he was a chemist, and he was able to go through the whole process of breaking it down and developing it into his meth.
Did you ever see what kind of chemicals he used to do that?
I couldn't remember off the top of my head. I saw everything he used. He taught me how to make it.
And as far as what you do remember, what do you remember him doing to...
I remember him taking a battery apart and taking the lithium from inside of it, sealing it into a glass jar, and then having me shake it for 15 to 20 minutes until it was ready. Zinc. The zinc inside of it is what he put in there.
And did you see him use anything else?
It was a large chemistry set. I'm not familiar with the chemicals and what he was using.
Now, did Ed Campbell ever have concerns about you bringing cell phone in his presence?
Yes, sir. When discussing certain topics like drugs or illegal activity, he would have us take the battery out of the phone, turn the phone off, take the battery out, and then separate the battery from the phone.
Did Ed Campbell ever talk to you about being in the Navy?
Yes, sir. He told me that he was a deep-sea diver.
Did he tell you anything else?
He also told me that when he was off duty or when he...
Huh?
Did you ever see Ed Campbell and Holly Campbell?
Yes, sir.
you would tell us about what you saw.
He was very condescending, disrespectful. He did not treat her ladylike. He would yell at her and treat her like a slave around the house. He was very aggressive. Even if she was trying to be polite or would say, "I love you," if he was in a bad mood or bad attitude, he would just simply say "F you," or because he was just angry all the time.
Now, do you remember a period of time when Eric Campbell was homeschooled?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what was when you would go over and see him during that period of time, what kind of things were going on?
Eric was forced to make excellent grades on his study, and he was to do that and then immediately go to his chores and complete those. If those weren't complete, I was not allowed to come over. I wasn't even allowed to speak to Eric.
And did you ever see him with his younger siblings, Alyssa and Matt?
Many times.
And how was Eric with them?
He was very considerate and caretaking. He was very good to Alyssa, Matthew, and Isaac. He pretty much raised them. He would play tea party and stuff like that with Alyssa. At a young age, he was showing Matthew how to work a computer and had him on Minecraft so he could develop his mind, and was building structures and stuff like that on there at a very young age. Isaac, he pretty much taught all of them how to walk, how to speak. They said his name before they said their parents.
And what were the circumstances under which he would take care of them?
Ed told him, I feed, clothe, and shelter you. You're to...
Unless he personally heard it.
Is that something you personally heard?
Yeah. No.
Okay, so do you know how often was Eric taking care of his?
Every day.
And how do you know that?
Because I would go over there and I wasn't allowed to hang out with Eric if he was required to be taking care of the children.
Have you ever seen Ed, become? I know you talked about Ed being aggressive. Have you ever seen him actually be aggressive like that towards Eric?
Yes.
If you could tell us, give us an example.
Just getting up into his face, trying to instigate a fight, just spitting on him. Sometimes he would grab his arm, but that's about as far as he would take. He's made sure never to make a scene in front of people, especially me.
And when Ed would do those kind of things to Eric, how would Eric respond?
He shuffle his feet, very submissive. A beat down was immediate to do whatever Ed said to do.
Now, after high school, did Eric continue to stay at home? Do you remember? Eric graduated high school before you did.
Yeah. He was forced to stay there. He didn't really have anywhere to go. There was a time he tried to move out, and he had come over to my house, and he was asking if he could stay there, but my parents wouldn't allow it due to knowing how Ed was.
So there was a time when Eric, how old was Eric when he came to wanting to live with you?
19 years old.
Now, did he go to your house a lot?
Yes, sir.
And what was it like at your house?
Well, we would build forts, watch cartoons, stuff like that, eat ice cream a lot, just hang out. It was a lot better environment. He was always happy when he was at my house. My family let him eat dinner with us, and we took him in. He's as close to me as my own blood brothers are.
So that time when he came and wanted to live with you all when he was 18 and 19, what was the reason he wanted to live with you?
His dad was abusive. It had gotten to the point where he had...
And was he allowed to live with you?
No, sir.
And do you know why he was not allowed?
Objection.
And after that, where did Eric go back to his father?
He was forced to. He had nowhere else to go.
Come on.
Now, you mentioned earlier about Sudafed. Who all bought Sudafed for Ed?
Eric, Nicholas, Holly, I myself did. Eric's girlfriend at the time, Chloe, had bought it a few times.
And would Ed ask you to do that? I mean, how did that come about?
He would bribe me to do that. Actually, with he would say he would make margaritas, and he explained the situation that it could only be purchased 3 times a month, and that he needed that to make his.
Come on.
You go ahead.
I'm sorry, where was it? He had.
It's a guy's question again. So you said he would bribe you to buy food that you tell us about.
Yes, with alcohol and margaritas, because you can only purchase it three times a month. And so with him getting different people to do it, he was able to purchase larger quantities to make his meth.
Now, at some point after high school, did Eric get a job?
Yes, sir.
Do you know where that job was?
Dish Network, sir.
What happened when Eric got that job at Dish Network?
He was kicked out of his house because he was no longer able to take care or tend to the children. And that was his dad's stipulations.
And do you know where he went after that?
Yes, he moved in with me. We got a house, and he moved in, and I had a girlfriend. And I didn't have a job at the time. He pretty much paid and took care of everything.
And did y'all live at that? Where was that? Where was that apartment?
It was an apartment. It was a little house, and it was right in the middle of Alvin. We weren't there very long, maybe a month and a half. I couldn't remember the address.
And where did y'all go after that month and a half?
Afterwards, we went to go live with my grandmother in a garage apartment. She was against him coming to stay with us at first because my mother had.
And did Eric move in to your grandmother's?
Yes, he did.
And what was that situation like?
It was good. We were able to hang out every day. We didn't have to pay rent. My grandmother paid for everything so long as we tended to her yard, took care of her.
And did Eric, those chores that were necessary, did Eric participate in those chores?
Yes, sir. That's why he got to stay.
Now, did Eric ever have any other jobs other than Dish Network?
Yes, sir. He worked in another company that was owned by my brother-in-law at the time, Gulf Coast Services, which was doing water filtration in the plants, working with RO systems, reverse osmosis.
Did you work there as well?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was Eric good at that job?
He was better than I was and advanced and progressed in that job better than I did.
Do you know of him working anywhere else?
Yes, after he left that job, which we worked for, he worked there 7 to 8 months, I believe, and when his reason for leaving was he went to go work with Cher in Canada.
And who's Cher?
His aunt.
And did you see him after he came back from the summer?
Yes, sir, I did.
And do you know if he worked anywhere after that?
After that, he finished getting his college degree for an HVAC license, and he went to go work in AC.
Now, how often did you see him during that period of time? Well, I'm sorry, you all were living together at your grandma's house. At some point, did you stop living with your grandma?
Yes, and he continued to stay there.
And where did you go?
I went, that was around when me and Jennifer got together, and I think I moved to West Texas for a little while, and then I had moved back into her mother's garage apartment.
And when did you and Jennifer get married?
On my 20th birthday. I'm 23 now, so 2014, May 11th.
And did Eric attend your wedding?
Yes, sir, he was my best man.
United States has been marked as exhibit at 44. 44. Not on that approach.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Warman, what is that a picture of?
That's a picture of Jennifer and her bridesmaid, my father, me, and Eric as my best man, bowing our head during my father's prayer.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of the wedding you were just talking about?
Yes, sir, it is.
And would it help illustrate your testimony?
Yes, sir, it would.
Your Honor, this time I'd ask to admit Defense Exhibit 44.
No objection.
No objection.
That's allowed.
Your Honor, I'd ask to publish it by having the deputy
Yes, sir.
display it for the jury. Now, after you married Jennifer, did you continue to see Eric?
Yes.
And did he ever meet your children?
He's the godfather of my son.
And how did he interact with your children?
He played with them a lot more than I was. He was used to children at the time, and I was a new father. He was more understanding when they would cry, and he played with them, would talk to him, make faces, and try and make him smile.
Now, did there come a time when you learned that Eric's father had been arrested for assaulting Holly?
Yes, sir.
And where was Eric living when that happened?
He was living with my grandmother at the time, but when Ed was arrested,
No.
Your Honor, I asked to make a problem.
Who was responsible? Going to your next question.
Yes. So Eric was living with your grandmother when Ed was arrested. Is that?
yes.
And was Eric allowed to continue living with your grandmother after that?
You can't answer that.
Was Eric allowed to continue living with your grandmother after that?
No, sir.
And why not?
Be-
That's all. You can tell how you know.
Was Eric allowed to continue living with your grandmother?
No, because he asked to bring some of Ed's belongings to that apartment, and my grandmother was scared of Ed.
And did Eric, when your grandmother asked him to move out, did Eric move out?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And where did Eric go?
He moved back to Indian Acres and lived in the living room
Do you know why he lived in the living room?
because he couldn't stand being in his father's room or his bedroom due to the
Sustain.
Did Eric tell you why he liked this and being in that?
Yes, sir, he did.
Sustain.
And did Eric tell you about trying to bond his dad out?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
His dad asked him to
Come on.
You can answer that.
asked him to sell a few of his belongings at the house and made a list out and the prices to sell them for so that he could bail Ed out.
And did you talk with Eric about Eric wanting to bail his dad?
Yes.
And what did Eric tell you?
That was his dad, and even though he had made some mistakes, that would always be his father, and that he was trying to help him.
Well, when was the last time you saw Eric before the incident?
I went over to their house, and Ed was there, and Ed was forcing him to stay there.
You need to be specific on time.
Yes, sir. You said you went to the house and you saw Ed there. That was in the period of time after Ed had been gotten out of jail.
Yes, sir.
Do you know what day that was?
No, sir, I do not.
And did you talk with Ed or did you talk to Eric?
No, I talked with Eric only.
And Ed was at the house. Do you know, was Ed staying at the house?
Yes, he was trying to gather his belongings to get out.
And did you see Eric on Thanksgiving?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what were the circumstances
Eric had no family and nowhere to go, so after I had finished and made my family meetings for Thanksgiving short, me and my wife prepared a meal and had him over, and we had Thanksgiving together as a family.
And did y'all have any plans for Christmas?
Yes, sir. He was supposed to join us for Christmas. I still have his Christmas present in my nightstand.
Have you ever seen Eric stand up to his dad?
No, he wasn't able.
At any point during your life, did you ever see Eric stand up to his dad?
No, he was not able.
No further questions.
Witness,
Ms. Warman, Eric Campbell is your best friend,
Yes, sir.
and you traveled here from across the country to be here to speak in his behalf.
Yes, sir.
And you could say whatever you need to say to, if you thought would help him.
I would tell the truth only.
Well, you were strongly motivated, aren't you?
Could you be more specific?
You're motivated. You have Eric's interest in mind.
Yes, sir.
You don't know the Faulkners at all, do you?
Pardon?
You do not know the Faulkners. You didn't know them, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
With respect to this abuse that you saw, did you tell your parents?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did they ever make a report to the Department of Social Services?
They did.
oh, you know,
They did not want to get involved due to Ed's aggressive behavior.
Okay. Did you ever make a report to the Department of Social Services?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you ever tell one of your teachers?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you ever tell a guidance counselor?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you ever tell a school principal?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you ever tell one of the coaches?
I told no one.
And despite this, you continued to go over to the house.
Yes, sir.
Now, you knew Ed was making meth,
Yes, sir.
and you continued to go over there.
Yes, sir.
And as a matter of fact, you participated with Ed in making this methamphetamine.
Once or twice, yes, sir.
Okay. Enough to, as you say, learn it.
Yes, sir.
And you never reported this, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
You and Mr. Campbell actually enjoyed drinking together, didn't you?
From time to time, yes, sir.
Well, pretty frequently, didn't you?
Responsibly, but yes.
Okay. And you also smoked some weed.
Yes, sir.
And you also did methamphetamine together.
Once or twice, I did not care for it.
But you cared for the marijuana.
Yes, sir.
And you cared for the alcohol.
No, sir.
Now, Ms. Warman, you were with Mr. Campbell when you broke into the church, right?
Yes, sir.
And when the authorities showed up, you didn't tell them what had happened, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
You didn't tell them the truth.
No, sir.
You lied to them for about half an hour or so.
Yes, sir.
And the night that Ed Campbell assaulted Holly Campbell, you were over there at that house, weren't you?
No, sir.
Well, if Eric said that you were, is he lying?
We had gone over there. I'm not sure if that was the night. We had stepped inside the house. Eric had just made it over the threshold, and Ed hollered over the balcony, "Is it Nicholas or is it Eric?" And Eric said, "It's Eric." And I was standing right there at the door, and then Ed said, "You need to leave unless you want to see bloodshed or clean it up."
And so what did you do?
We left.
What did you do?
W-
You said we left.
I left with Eric.
Did you go call the police?
No, sir.
Did you go tell your parents?
No, sir.
What did you and Eric then, after you left, after you crossed back over the threshold, what did you do?
We went back to our apartment.
And what?
Hung out, played video games, watched a movie, maybe went to sleep.
No further questions.
been read.
Now, when you heard Ed Campbell say, "Get out of here unless you want to clean up blood or unless you want to see blood," whatever it was, had you heard him say things like that before?
Yes, sir.
Was that unusual that he said?
No, sir.
And why did y'all leave?
Because we were intimidated and we didn't want to become part of the conflict with Ed.
Now, you said that you told your parents is that right? I may have misheard your testimony.
Yes.
But you never reported it to the Department of Social Services?
No, sir.
And what did your parents think about it when you told them?
They thought Edward.
Your Honor, I'm asking her.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just get to the jury in just a few moments while there. Don't discuss this case for yourself. You should be formal, express an opinion about this case during this time. That's your excuse. Make your pledges at court.
What did your parents think when you told them about Ed abusing you?
They thought he was very aggressive. They thought he was crazy. My mom had actually met Ed during a 4th of July event.
And what steps did they take? Did they tell you, did they alter in any way how they wanted you to interact with Eric after you told them about it?
They told me to stay away from Ed, that they really cared about Eric. He had interacted with my family and had been taken into our home. Eric was the only friend I had. They just wanted me to stay away from Ed and to be cautious at all times.
You don't know offer on that question. And I would say to stay open the door and ask him specifically, did he tell his parents? Did his parents call DSS? And I think I have a right to ask him what their reaction was when he did tell them and what steps they did.
Your Honor, I just contend that it's hearsay.
Allow her to answer, good. You wait for you.
After you told your parents about how Ed was abusing Eric, what did they say to you?
They told me to avoid Ed at all costs and to just keep my distance, that they were okay with me spending time with Eric because they cared about him and he was taken into our family, but they knew Ed was a very aggressive and unstable man.
Witness with state.
You said that you worked over there about 12 hours a day.
8 to 10.
8 to 10. I'm sorry. And you spent a tremendous amount of time with Eric, is that right?
Yes, sir, I did.
And all this time. Thanks, sir. You stand there.
Thank you.
For the attitude, thank you.
Your Honor, if that would be convenient, we'd ask for those morning breaks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning recess at this point. During our morning recess period, it is your duty not to talk among yourselves about this case. It's your duty not to talk to the parties, the witnesses, or the lawyers about anything at all. It's your further duty not to talk to anyone else, to allow anyone else to talk with you, to say anything in your presence about this case. If anyone communicates with you about anything, you let the sheriff know about it when you come in. Don't do any individual research or investigation on your own about any issue touching on this trial, and do not form or express any opinion about this case during this period. With that, ladies and gentlemen, while everyone else will remain seated, I'll excuse the 17 of you and ask that you return to some of the jury room at 20 minutes after the hour of 11. Again, we go by that clock. That church
and his brother-in-law, Josh Boyd, were headed south on Highway 96 north near Sam Blackwell Road. There was a white Suburban in front of them as they approached Sam Blackwell Road. The left signal light began to blink. Mike made a comment that said, "Josh, why is this clean vehicle going down a dirt road?" The vehicle sped up when it got to Jerome Faulkner's driveway and put on brakes hard as an attempt to slow down and turn, but missed the turn. The vehicle went on when it got to Sheila Vaughn's driveway and pulled halfway off the road into the drive. He saw the driver take out what appeared to be a road map and began to look at it. The subject appeared to be in his 40s with a buzzed haircut and a few day-old facial hair. Could not see passenger. He turned down his driveway, which was directly across from Sheila Vaughn's residence. He noticed a funny-looking sign on the front of the vehicle, which looked like Texas. He went to the house, came back, and a few minutes later, the vehicle had left. You could see where the vehicle turned around in the Grand Ole Opry parking lot and headed back north on Highway 96. Did not see the vehicle anymore.
In that interview, Lieutenant Critcher, Mr. Weary, how did he describe the driver?
He's probably 40 years old, has a buzz, hairdo, and facial hair.
And could he describe the passenger?
No.
And what did he say that passenger was doing?
He couldn't see him.
Now, on January 12th, 2015, did you interview Josh Boyd?
Yes, sir.
On hand state with the Marcus Exhibit 46. Now, Brooke Wood.
Yes.
Lieutenant Critcher, I'm handing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 46. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
It's a statement of an interview that was taken on the 12th day of January 2015 at 4 p.m. in a phone interview with a Josh Boyd.
And when you, did you write that?
Yes, I did.
And did you write down everything Mr. Boyd told?
I wrote it down as he told me.
Your Honor, this time I read the Defense Exhibit 46.
No, sir.
Much less.
Lieutenant Critcher, if you would read that statement.
Says Mr. Boyd stated on December 31st, 2014, New Year's Eve, that he and Michael Weary on 96 North headed south. They were behind a white SUV when he got to Sam Blackwell Road, dirt road. On the right, the vehicle put on the signal lights. He and Michael both commented why is a clean SUV going down a dirt road. The vehicle sped up and did not turn. He went down the road in front of them. One point SUV put on his brakes like if it was going to turn. It continued up the road is where the little white fence was pulled off on the side of the road. The driver took out what appeared to be a road map. He and Mike thought this was strange because GPS today said it looked as having a light beard. This was sometime around 3:30 to 4 p.m. They turned to the left and went to Josh's house so he could get to his vehicle and go hunting. Did not see the SUV on the roadway. When he left, he headed south. The next day, he went to Josh's house at 6:50 a.m. When he pulled from the driveway at 7:05 a.m., he saw smoke through the fog and saw the house on fire.
Thank you, Lieutenant. If I could just have one moment. I'm handing the state what's been marked as. I'm sorry. On January 5th, 2015, do you remember interviewing John Slagle?
Yes, I do.
And is that the proprietor of the Slagle store in Virgilina, Virginia?
Yes, sir, Virgilina.
Virgilina. Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I'm handing the state what's been marked as Exhibit 47. on that person with?
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Critcher, I'm handing you what's been marked as offense exhibit 47. What is that?
It's a interview that I did with John Slagle on the 5th day of January, 2 p.m. at his store in Virginia.
And did you sign the report?
I did.
And is it an accurate report of the things that Mr. Slade told you?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, this time I would move to admit offense exhibit 47 into evidence.
Inject.
No, sir.
Right away.
Now, Lieutenant, if you would, can you read that statement into evidence?
John Slagle stated that on Wednesday, 12/31/2014, New Year's Eve, two white male subjects came into his store in Virginia, Virginia. One subject was older than the other, like a father and son. Subject was driving a white SUV parked in front of the store. Subject came into the store and walked around. The older subject asked for a road map. He had not seen subject before, and he asked where were they from. The older subject said Texas. Jimmy Long, a customer, was sitting in the table in front of the window. He told the subject he had a cousin who lived in Austin, Texas. The subject purchased one slim bottle drink, possibly a Pepsi or Dr. Pepper, and one pack of nails. Both subjects took back to the counter, would not come directly up to the front of him. He thought this was strange. There was a monitor in front of the cash register and timed out after 72 hours. This was sometime after 6 p.m., not sure, because Jimmy Long stated he had to leave at 8 p.m. Jimmy Long had his pistol on his side and could be seen by both subjects. The next day, Don saw these subjects on TV and made a comment that these were the two in his store.
And was that everything that he told you that day?
Yes, sir.
No, I have no further questions. Thank you for your time, Lieutenant.
Thank you. Lieutenant Critcher, you spoke to Michael Weary over the phone, is that correct?
That's correct.
You guys have an interview room and the capability to video any interview or talk that you have with anybody at the sheriff's office, is that
We do.
correct? But you didn't do that with Mr. Weary.
He called me and he gave it to me as just general information because he said it was something he thought was suspicious that I need to know.
And may I approach? And Detective Critcher, after you made this report, you typed this report, is that correct, on State's Exhibit number 45 with Mr. Weary, is that correct?
Secretary typed it, yes.
Well, did you tell her what to type?
I hand wrote it out and I give it to her to type.
And is this your signature?
That is my signature.
Is Michael Weary's signature on here?
It is not.
Did you ask Michael Weary to look back over this statement that you wrote down to make sure that that's exactly what he told you?
Mike was not in my presence at that time. He was on the phone and I did not get back with him, no ma'am.
So he didn't review what you wrote to say that that's what he told you, is that correct?
No.
And if I may approach again, Your Honor, when you spoke with Josh Boyd, you did that, you say on January 12th, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you did that over the phone?
That's correct.
You didn't call him in and videotape that interview, did you?
No, I did not.
And is Mr. Boyd's signature on this
It
statement?
is not.
Did you ask him to review the statement to make sure that that is in fact what he told you?
No,
And the same with Mr. Slagle. Is his signature on there?
it is not.
And did you talk to him and ask him to review that was exactly what he told you?
I read that statement to him in his store, did not get him to sign it, and I give him a copy of the statement.
You gave him a copy of that typed statement?
Yes, I did.
And he said,
It was mailed to him, ma'am. I'm sorry. It was mailed to him.
and did he mail it back saying that that's what he had said?
No, ma'am, it didn't.
And if you asked them any follow-up questions, you didn't write that in your interview there that you typed up, did you?
I didn't do any follow-up.
When you were talking to him on the phone, you didn't ask them any questions, you just heard what they said.
Well, I asked him questions just like in the statement it asked as far as to what he said they looked like. I asked him could he identify them, and that's when he told me what he told me is what they looked like.
But you didn't write down what you asked them and what their response to your
No, I
question
did not.
was. I don't have anything further.
To the best of your recollection, did you write down everything they told you?
I did. I wrote it down as it was told to me, the way they told it to me.
No further questions.
No, sir.
Right, sir, you stand there.
Here we call Jennifer Warman. Now, Ms. Warman, tell the jury who you are,
Jennifer Warman,
and where do you live,
in Spring, Texas.
and what do you do for a living?
I stay at home with my children.
And are you married?
Yes, sir.
And who are you married to?
To Shane Warman.
And Shane Warman's the man who testified just a few minutes ago?
Yes, sir.
How long have you known Shane?
We officially met in first grade, and we've been dating on and off since sixth grade.
So you've been friends a long time before you were married?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how long have you known Eric Campbell?
Probably since around sixth grade, but we really got close around Shane's 18th birthday, which was in 2012, I believe.
Now you say that you all were close. What do you mean by that?
He was over at our house often. I was over with Shane and Eric when they were living in Shane's grandmother's apartment.
And what kind of relationship did you or do you have with Eric?
When I married Shane, Eric came along.
He was, so they're very close.
He's our family, yes.
How often did you see Eric during the period of time since you said it was Shane's 18th birthday?
Yes.
How often did you see him?
Since Shane's 18th birthday?
Well, I mean, between the time, obviously, you haven't seen him in the last couple of years, but you said that at some point you and Eric became close. And when you visited Eric's family on those, you're talking about a couple of particular times.
Yes, sir.
What did you notice about his relationship with his siblings? Well, did you see him interacting with his siblings?
Eric, yes.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Eric was always with his siblings. Alyssa, my youngest son, or my son does this to my husband. He hangs on his legs and they have to kind of walk around. Alyssa did that all the time to Eric. She was constantly with him. Eric was always the one kissing the bobos and giving the hugs and kisses and very above them and fatherly-like.
Now, you mentioned that you were there another time. Were you there on occasion when Alyssa had a birthday party?
Yes.
And when was that, if you remember?
I don't recall the year. They were still building the swimming pool. I was still pregnant, so 2014.
So did you witness some interaction between Edward Campbell and Holly Campbell that was significant to you that night?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And what did you see happen?
Holly was taking a cookie sheet of French fries out, and a few of them were burnt, and Ed didn't like that, and so he took his hand underneath the cookie sheet and popped it out of his hands, and fries went flying all over the floor.
And what had to happen as a result of that?
Holly didn't do any. She acted like it was casual. The fries got cleaned up later. She put more fries in the oven and continued cooking.
Now, was that pretty much, had you spent much time over there before or after that?
No, sir.
So that was just one of the couple of times you were over there?
Yes, sir.
Now, were you aware of a time when Eric moved back into that? You mentioned that he was living at Shane's grandmother's house. Were you aware of a time when he moved back into his family home?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you, had Eric at times spent the night with you?
Yes, sir.
And were there times when you had an encounter with him late at night or after everyone had gone to bed?
Yes, sir.
And what happened?
He would just be sitting up, not sleeping, and I would ask him, "Are you okay?" And he would just answer, "Yeah, it was a bad dream. I'll go to sleep in a few hours or whenever I can."
Now, During the time he had moved back into his family home, would you also see Eric? Did he come over to your house still?
Yes, sir.
And how did he appear to you when he would come back over?
Very distressed. Bags under his eyes. You could tell he hasn't been sleeping.
And did you understand why he was having trouble sleeping at his home?
Objection.
Well, did he describe to you some of the problems he was having sleeping?
Yes, sir.
And what did he tell you about that?
That he was having memories of things that had happened in what he called that home or that house.
And did he describe how it felt to him?
Said that it was like an elephant was sitting on his chest, that he couldn't breathe some of the times when he was waking up.
During the years that you've had a relationship with Eric, what was his general demeanor like?
Very soft-spoken. The only time I've really seen him open was whenever he would be with my husband. He was great with my son. Like Shane stated earlier, he was very
How did he treat you?
Objection.
When you saw him interact with his father, how was he around his father?
very submissive.
And was Eric a close friend of yours?
Yes, still is.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Witness with respect.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. You stand.
Thank you.
Further evidence to the defendant.
Here we, Mr. Campbell called Ayesha Chaudhry.
Be solemnly swear that evidence you should give the court and the jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
Will you state your name? Tell the jury who you are.
I'm Ayesha Chaudhry. I'm a psychiatrist.
And Dr. Chaudhry, where are you employed?
I work at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina.
And what is your job at Duke University?
My job at Duke University involves taking care of Duke University students, young adult population, for their mental health and psychiatric treatment needs.
Now, explain to the jury the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I'm sure they know that, but just to be clear, if you'll explain the key distinctions.
Of course. A psychologist is a mental health specialist who has non-medical training. They are not trained in the field of medicine. However, they have expertise in the theories of understanding the behaviors of humans and things that go wrong with that. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor who has completed their medical training, including surgery, obstetrics, GYN, internal medicine, radiology, and at the end of that training as a medical doctor, then the psychiatrist undergoes additional specialized training in mental health issues.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, tell us, how did you train to become a psychiatrist? Tell us about your training.
I completed I completed a 5-year medical training program. That was the program that I was enrolled in. Following that, I completed a 1-year required licensure internship, 6 months of general surgery, 6 months of general medicine. Following that, I completed my United States board exams. My training was at the Aga Khan University in Karachi in Pakistan. And after passing my U.S. medical boards to qualify for my MD, I underwent a residency training at Duke University Medical Center. The first year of that training was, part of it was general internal medicine, part of it was psychiatry. The next,
Dr. Chaudhry, let me interrupt you. What
Yes,
year
sir.
was it when you began your residency training at Duke?
So that I began that in 1993.
Okay, go ahead and then continue on. I just
Okay.
wanted to give it some timing.
Sure. From 1993 until 1997, I completed the accredited requirements for a general and adult psychiatry residency. The following year, I was invited to stay as a executive chief resident for the psychiatry residency program. So I exited my chief residency year in 1998.
Where did you go to work after you, and were you qualified to practice medicine as a psychiatrist at that point?
Yes, sir, I was.
And where did you start working at that point?
I began working at Durham County Mental Health Center. At that time, it was called the Durham Center, which was a job I did for 2 years.
And what kinds of things did you do in your practice with the Durham Center?
At the Durham Center, we had a population of individuals who have had severe and chronic mental conditions. They were often very underprivileged, often were on public assistance for their health care as well as for their food and residential circumstances. So my job was to be their psychiatrist. I would treat people with conditions such as schizophrenia, severe bipolar disorder, severe personality disorders, in addition to very severe personality disorders and anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as severe depression with psychotic features or other psychotic conditions.
Now, did you continue in that job? How long did you stay in that job?
I stayed in that job for 2 years, after which I began my current job at Duke, which is at the Student Health Counseling Center, where all of my patients are Duke students. They're young adults.
When you mentioned that your patients are students and young adults, is the clinic set up to provide care just for the students?
Yes, sir, it is.
And what range of ages do you generally specialize in and focus on?
Most of the time, the patients I see are somewhere between age 18 to age maybe 29, 30, 35 at the oldest.
Is that care available to undergrads, graduates, and professional students as well?
Yes, it is. It's for all enrolled students.
Is there anything significant particularly about that age as far as mental health is concerned?
Absolutely. It's a very important age, not only for people as they're developing their individuality, their personality, their temperament. It's also a very important age where young people, most of us, actually have undergone our training that becomes our career in the future. So it's a very rich time of learning, as well as developing peer relationships. In addition to that, that also happens to be, from a neurobiological standpoint, a period of time where the human brain is undergoing a very robust and very important reorganization, sort of like in the first year of life, where a baby will undergo these very important big learning steps. They'll learn to walk, they'll learn to talk. Those are similar things that are happening in the human brain during the phase of young adulthood. That's also happens to be an extremely vulnerable time where a lot of chronic or severe mentally where chronic severe psychiatric conditions can begin. People might appear to be starting to have some mental health difficulties. These can often bloom into more serious conditions like schizophrenia, like bipolar disorder, substance use disorders. That's a very vulnerable time for people, as well as other psychiatric conditions, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive, post-traumatic stress disorder as well.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, over the years, and in your practice at Duke, do you treat all sorts of mental health conditions?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us a little bit about the range of conditions you see in your practice at Duke?
Of course. So things could be as mild or transient as a young person, a college student, experiencing extreme stress because their father was diagnosed with cancer, or their mother has lost their job, or they're having difficulty with their academics or their professor or their roommate. And these are very developmental things that most of us go through, and part of my work is actually to support these people through this process and help them to not only manage their symptoms but also to build life skills that help them to be able to navigate these things in their life going forward. This is pretty mild and short-term kind of treatment required. Sometimes I see people who have fairly severe problems, lifelong problems that have been going on for many years, severe anxiety disorders or post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as chronic recurring anxiety, depression. And then at the very end of the spectrum, sometimes we'll see people really starting to unravel in terms of beginnings of psychosis or the beginnings of bipolar disorder, which are lifelong and potentially debilitating conditions.
And Dr. Chaudhry, how many people have you treated for these various disorders over your career?
Very, very many people. I would say probably thousands. I wouldn't be able to give you a number, but probably several thousand people.
Now, is most of your work as a treating physician or as a psychiatrist who actually treats patients?
Yes, I would say less than 20% of my work is doing this kind of work related to the law. More than I would say 80% or more of my work is my clinical work.
Now, you mentioned that you do other kinds of psychiatric work. How did you get, what kind of work, how are you here? In what capacity are you here as a witness?
So I'm here in my capacity of working as a forensic psychiatrist.
How is that different than as a treating psychiatrist?
It's very different because as a treating psychiatrist, there are two critical differences. Number one is that I have a patient-doctor relationship with my patients. I'm their doctor, and with that, I am obliged to, number one, keep their information confidential. That's required by law for HIPAA. The second thing is it's my obligation to provide treatment recommendations and to assist them in identifying their treatment based on their treatment needs and based on their preferences. In my forensic practice, I don't have a patient-doctor relationship with anyone who I examine, and it is not expected or required. I'm not their treatment provider, so I don't make any, I can't make any treatment recommendations for that individual.
Now, and how long have you been working in the capacity of a forensic psychiatrist?
I began doing this work in 2013.
Now, is your approach or your ability to diagnose mental disorders any different in your clinical or forensic practice?
Yes, there are some key differences. The first difference is that if somebody comes to me in my clinic, that is because they're asking me for help. It's something that they themselves are seeking. Whereas when I do a forensic evaluation, it's usually not the individual who's requesting that I work with them. The second thing that's very different is, by and large, when I do a clinical evaluation, I'm relying, almost 90% of my information is based on what that person is sharing with me in my office. So just like any of us would go to the doctor and they would say, you know, having problems with sleep, great. Tell me about your sleep problems. When did they begin? And so I'm basically relying, the bulk of my information is coming from that person who's giving me, you know, their symptoms. The difference in a forensic report is that I cannot only rely on what the examinee is sharing with me. That's because of the nature of the reason that I was hired, is because there are some legal charges there. And it's important for me not only to count what that individual is sharing with me, but it's also important for me to review as much what we call collateral information, additional information from not just other parties at the present time, but also to look over the course of a lifetime. Because that longitudinal view, that longitudinal information gives you a lot more information, and you're better able to see the picture of what's going on. In addition, in my clinical work, often I'll use what are called standardized objective rating scales. These are screening tools, and I use them just as a way to provide optimal patient care. In particular, when I'm conducting a forensic assessment, these rating scales are very important because these are standardized instruments. They are normed. They are designed specifically to pick up things in case I have missed something. And I also use scales that are designed to identify if somebody is trying to falsify their symptoms. So that's also another important component. And I use this in a more rigorous way in my forensic assessment than I would in a clinical setting.
Dr. Chaudhry, are you licensed to practice medicine in North Carolina?
Yes, sir, I am.
And how long have you held that license?
I guess since 1993.
And are you board certified as a psychiatrist in North Carolina?
Yes, sir, I am.
Now, at this time, Your Honor, I'd offer Dr. Chaudhry as a witness qualified to render expert opinion in the field of forensic psychiatry.
Yes, sir, Judge, I'd like to be heard.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll excuse you to the jury for just a few moments while you do not discuss the case among yourselves, this is the form of expression. Any opinion about the issue in this trial during this trial?
Your Honor, my objection is to her being qualified as an expert in forensic psychiatry. I believe she certainly is qualified as a psychiatrist. I don't believe this court has heard any testimony about any fellowship, any training, any sort of specialized training that she has had in the area of forensic psychology. She certainly has been able to tell the difference between forensic psychiatry and psychiatry. That is not anything that requires any special skill. Anybody can read that. She's opened some sort of forensic psychiatric practice, but the only thing, she hasn't testified to any generalized training or skill set that she has to perform. Dr. Chaudhry, you, on your CV, ma'am, you stated that from 2009 until 2010 that you are a forensic SWAT team member. What does that mean?
Ma'am, at the time, the Department of Psychiatry at Duke University had created a forensic task force so that psychiatrists who were affiliated with the department with various areas of expertise in their clinical field would be available for for forensic consulting services if the need were to arise.
So you have not completed the forensic fellowship that's offered in North Carolina, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you are not board certified as a forensic psychiatrist, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You're not even eligible to sit for that because you have not completed the forensic fellowship.
Yes, I've not gone through a formal training. However, part of the general psychiatry training and part of the general psychiatry board certification actually does require specialized forensic training during the course of that. And during the course of my ongoing training, at that point, I had participated in that curriculum. I passed all the requirements for that.
And that's back in 1993?
This was the final year of my training, so this was in 1997.
And since then, you haven't done a forensic fellowship?
No, I've not done a forensic fellowship.
And you're not board certified?
That's correct.
And you haven't done, the last time that you did any training was in 1997?
That's not correct. It's part of my requirement to maintain a license that I engage in ongoing annual training, and that ongoing annual training is something that is incumbent upon each physician to select training that is required for, that is consistent with their area of practice. My area of practice includes young adult general psychiatry, as well as my area of practice includes forensic psychiatry. In addition to that, I underwent recertification for my general and adult psychiatry boards in 2009, and that has a standardized curriculum that is not physician-driven or physician-selected. That is a part of the general competence, which includes forensic training and updates on that as well.
I don't have anything further, Judge.
Not this time, Your Honor.
Again, Judge, I renew my objection to her being qualified as an expert in the area of forensic psychiatry. I do not believe that there has been a proper foundation showing that she can, that she has had the proper training, and that therefore she would have the proper knowledge to be able to render an opinion in forensic psychiatry, which would be the defendant's mental health or state at the time of this offense. And that is what is pertinent to this particular case, Judge. She states in her evaluation that she performed, that we were given, that she was requested to perform a psychiatric evaluation on Eric Campbell, not that she was asked to perform a forensic psychiatric evaluation on Eric Campbell. Certainly she could have treated him and seen him after this occasion happened and render an opinion as to his mental state when she interviewed him and that he came to see her. But I don't believe that she is qualified to render an opinion as to his mental state at the time that this occurred. And I would ask that you not allow her to be qualified as a forensic psychiatrist.
Sure, if I may, Your Honor. Well, I didn't think.
This is central to your stuff. Y'all do it. You can have a chance.
Okay.
Go do it.
Don't
wait on me.
Dr. Chaudhry, have you said that you have worked you developed set up a forensic practice in 2013, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And during that time, have you been asked to evaluate different people related to legal proceedings?
Yes, sir, I have.
And about how many times have you evaluated people?
I couldn't tell you, but at least I would say probably somewhere between 30 to 50 times.
And have you, in addition to that, studied in the area of forensic psychiatry, studied the issues related to forensic psychiatry in North Carolina?
Yes, sir, I have.
And have you done additional training, like continuing education training related to forensic psychiatry?
Yes, sir, I have. In addition, I have been admitted as an expert in the state of North Carolina for forensic psychiatry in at least one previous instance.
Nothing further, Your Honor, related to that.
But any of this continuing education in the area of forensic psychiatry, that's not listed on your CV, is it?
No, it's not listed on my CV. However, I am a standing member of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, and I actively participate in ongoing clinical activity and ongoing educational activities that are provided by the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. There is a quarterly newsletter which I receive. There is a quarterly journal, in addition to which I engage in peer supervision and peer discussions around this.
But you're not licensed, I mean, you don't have a certification from them in forensic psychiatry.
Ma'am, there is no prohibition on a generalist from practicing in a specialty area of field if they have conducted the adequate educational, if they have covered the adequate educational material, and if they demonstrate competence.
They offer a certification and you do not have it, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, I renew my objection.
Your Honor, the rule doesn't say anything about certification. What it does say, an expert by knowledge, which she has based on more than 20 years of practice, skill, which she has based on her setting up her practice and continuing to see clients as well as doing continuing legal education. Her experience that goes back to, I mean, diagnosing someone for a mental disorder in and of itself is related to the practice area. The area of the law relates to the training and the continuing education, and she said that she has continued to do that. I think that what the state is talking about are things that are relevant to cross-examination, but not to her qualifications as an expert. I mean, I don't think there's any qualification that you be board certified to testify related to a specific area of, to a specific issue in the case, at least not by my reading of the rule. Her testimony will be based on sufficient data and facts. She can explain her principles and methods and how she approached the case. And so we would contend that she's qualified based on her training and experience. And I mean, really, the state's objection is to the certification, and I don't think that's a valid basis.
Our objection is to the fact that I don't believe that there's been any foundation to show that she should be qualified as an expert in the area of forensic psychiatry. None of that was laid out here, Judge, and I think just because she set up a practice and says that she set up a practice in January of 2013 that she is a self-proclaimed forensic psychiatrist doesn't make it so. And I just don't think that she's qualified to testify as to his mental state at the time that this occurred. Sure, she can talk about any diagnosis that he had perhaps when she met with her. There's no doubt she's been in mental health. She's worked at Duke Student Health for 20 years, worked with adolescents, worked with folks who are the same age as him who have mental health symptoms or issues at the time that they are seeing her. And that's what she does.
Okay, I'll let her be received for what she's setting herself up across the examination. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Chaudhry, at some point were you asked to do an evaluation in this case?
Yes, sir, I was.
And exactly what were you asked to do?
I was asked to perform a general psychiatric evaluation for your client and to address my findings in relationship with his legal case.
Now, do you remember when you were asked to do this?
It was sometime in the fall of 2016.
And what was your approach to this evaluation? I mean, how did you plan to carry out the evaluation?
I carried out the evaluation as I usually do, which is I request a certain set of data, of materials, of background information involving an individual's previous medical records, previous psychiatric history, any child protective services records, any occupational records, any other interviews of people who have known this individual longer than I have. In addition, any legal information, any discovery files, any medical records or other records, custodial records from when the individual has been incarcerated. In addition to that, I interviewed Mr. Eric Campbell. Part of my visits with him, I conducted 4 face-to-face visits with him. Part of those visits were actual interview of asking him both open-ended questions as well as closed-ended questions, as well as conducting standardized clinical rating scales to identify the intensity or severity of the symptoms if they were present.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, when you told us what you did overall, sort of chronologically, how do you, well, first of all, did you receive information that was collateral to what Mr. Campbell told you, or other information?
Yes, sir, I did.
And how much information did you receive?
Oh, I couldn't tell you the exact number of pages, but it was at least 3,000 pages of information, maybe more.
When did you review that material before you talked to Mr. Campbell?
I received that material before, but I did not actually review that before. When I met with him, and I do this with everybody that I'm conducting an assessment for, that I want to actually just see that individual as they are and form my own opinion based on what I have seen in my clinical examination and my psychiatric examination, and then follow up by reviewing additional materials and collateral sources.
Now,
so I had received the information, but I met with him before I reviewed that.
when you first met with Mr. Campbell, during your first meeting, what were your general impressions of him during that meeting?
My general impression was that that Mr. Eric Campbell was in great distress, that he was horrified by the nature of the events that he had witnessed. He was horrified that he had not been able to do anything to intervene. He was very self-blaming. He was very self-critical, not only about these events in particular, but he also blamed himself as being a terrible person who had never been able to stand up to his father his whole life.
Now, you mentioned earlier at some point you did something called standardized rating scales.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell us, and we're going to go back to your interviews in a few minutes, but I want to first talk about those standardized rating scales. What are they?
Standardized rating scales are clinical instruments. These are different than psychometric testing, the way that a psychologist would conduct that. These standardized rating scales are developed for use in clinical settings. They're not something that is that I can just make up. These are developed by different teams of scientists, psychiatry researchers. It sometimes takes up to 10 years to develop one standardized clinical rating scale. There's a lot of assessments, a lot of identification of, number one, is this sensitive? That means, is it going to pick up something? Number two, is it specific? Is it going to pick up a diagnostic thing that we actually want it to pick up as opposed to a bunch of things? And then the third thing is its reliability. Is it reliable? As a mathematical concept of reliability, does it mean that this can actually consistently show the same thing? And then the other part of it is inter-rater reliability. So if 3 different psychiatrists administer the scale to the same individual, are we going to come up with very similar responses? So it's a very tightly measured instrument. It's sort of like the mental health version of a blood glucose level, right? So how do we know that a certain blood glucose level is in the normal range? The only way that we know that is because, you know, tens of thousands of people's blood glucose levels are tested, and then you identify, okay, where is the range of what is a normal blood glucose level, and then what's outside of that range is considered above or below. And the same is true for the psychometric or for the clinical psychiatric rating scales. This is how it's designed, is to identify what is within the normal range, what is above, and what is below.
Why do you give them? I mean, why is it important to you as a forensic psychiatrist to give these standardized rating scales?
There are 2 reasons. Number one is that it is important for me to identify whether or not the examinee is exaggerating or not exaggerating their symptoms. A lot of times examinees, for example, Mr. Eric Campbell, was underreporting his symptoms. And it wasn't until I actually looked at some of the rating scales that I realized the severity of some sets of symptoms that he wasn't actually sharing with me. And in fact, that's a consistent theme across the board in terms of several records that were reviewed for Mr. Eric Campbell, even when he was a little kid, is that his consistent theme, his consistent pattern has been to underreport the distress that he's feeling. So in that instance, to really identify what exactly is an objective level of severity, whether or not this person is sharing this information with me voluntarily. And then the other part of it is to make sure that I'm actually not missing something else, like I said, that the person might be underreporting. And especially in the case of forensic evaluations, I always administer a malingering test because we do know that given that this is a legal situation, there is always a potential risk for an individual who I'm examining to either exaggerate or to minimize their symptoms as a way of trying to seek advantage. So that's part of what makes my evaluation a reliable, comprehensive forensic evaluation.
Now, which standardized rating scales did you give in this case?
The standardized rating scales I administered were, first of all, was the TOMM, T-O-M-M. It's called the test of memory malingering. This is different than the test that was administered by the state's expert, Dr. Wolf. This is an opaque malingering test in which the examinee is unable to determine what exactly is being tested. And it's because of that, it's considered one of the most reliable malingering tests. The other tests I administered were the clinician-administered PTSD rating scale. The clinician-administered PTSD rating scale is one of the most thoroughly studied clinical rating scales to identify post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is known to be a chronic recurring condition, potentially. It can also be a very acute and short-lived condition. And in this case, I felt it was very important for me to do a good job evaluating, to identify what degree of these symptoms had predated the events that have led to these current charges, and what degree of these symptoms have emerged since the incidents in question, because obviously this was a horrific and traumatizing incident in and of itself to everyone involved. Other tests I conducted were the brief psychiatric rating scale, which is a broad, general, standardized scale to identify the presence or absence of psychosis, of thought disorders, hostility, depression, and anxiety. Other scales included the Montgomery-Åsberg Depression Rating Scale, which is a well-known and established standardized rating scale for the presence of existing symptoms of depression and the severity of those symptoms as well. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anyone here. The hair psychopathy checklist, revised version, which is a test to identify the presence of antisocial personality features or personality traits, meaning another word for that is psychopathy or sociopathy. I also administered a mini mental status exam, which is a 30-point questionnaire, which is designed to identify an individual's cognition and memory at the time that they're being tested. Another scale that was not administered but is a appraisal guide is called the Violence Risk Appraisal Guide, which I used. The disadvantage of this is that it's a static scale. It doesn't change over time. And the advantage of the other scales are that these things will change over time. They're really based on the situation, whereas the other one is based more on history. And of course, you don't change your history. Your history is your history. So that doesn't really dynamically change over the course of a lifetime.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, let's start with the TOM, or the test of memory malingering. Tell us a little bit about administering that test and what the results of the test were.
So the test is, you administer the test in 2 trials. This is almost like a memory card game, you know, when you're a little kid and you kind of try to match pictures. What we know about this test is that even individuals who are severely impaired with severe mental status changes, severe dementia, they are able to accurately identify this test. And so if somebody is even minimally pretending that, or even minimally unable to match those pictures, that's a really good indicator. This is a highly sensitive, highly specific test for memory malingering. And in the case of Mr. Eric Campbell's scores, he scored 100%. There was absolutely no evidence that he was trying to malinger or falsify any of that test.
Now, when you talk about the symptoms, Dr. Chaudhry, at any time did Eric Campbell say to you, give you any sort of result or diagnosis for himself or anything like that?
No, he did not.
When you talk about symptoms, what do you mean?
What I mean is I will ask people, how is your health? How is your sleep? How is your concentration? How is your mood? How are you getting along with people? In his case, how are you getting along with things when in your in central prison? And a lot of the times, people will volunteer this information to me. I don't have to ask them or dig for it. But in the case of Mr. Eric Campbell, it took a great deal of effort for me to dig for and to identify the symptoms that he was experiencing, mostly because he was very self-critical. He was very self-blaming. He wasn't complaining, so it did take some effort to get that information from him.
You mentioned that another standardized clinical rating scale was the hair psychopathy checklist. Tell us a little bit about that and why you give it.
The hair psychopathy checklist, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is a standardized rating scale that is designed to identify the presence of antisocial personality features. Also, another word for that is psychopathic personality features, traits. We know that people with those type of antisocial personality features and traits are very smooth, they're very charming, they're very glib, they work, they effortlessly avoid blame, they will put blame on others, they put their own needs above others, they use people for their own personal gain, they don't really establish deep and meaningful, caring relationships with people. And what we know about the hair PCL for standardized ratings is we know that the maximum score possible on the hair psychopathy checklist is 40. We know that a score of 30 or more is diagnostic of antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. So 30 or above is diagnostic. We know that people who are not psychopathic, but they have criminal histories, their usually average scores are in the range of 20 to 22. So it's people who have no criminal background, they usually score 5. And Mr. Eric Campbell scored 6 out of 40 on the Harris psychopathy checklist rating scale.
Now, the brief psychiatric rating scale, tell us a little bit about that.
The brief psychiatric rating scale can identify hostility, aggression, psychosis, depression, anxiety, and the cutoff score for that to show any pathology. I'm sorry, I'm just going to take a moment to make sure I get it right here. So the cutoff score for mildly ill is 31. A score of 41 corresponds with moderately ill, and a score of 53 is considered to be markedly ill. So Mr. Eric Campbell's combined total score was 62, which is remarkable because at the time that I had examined him, he had already been prescribed medications. So clearly there were what we call residual symptoms. So sometimes you take, a blood pressure pill, you're taking the pill, but your blood pressure is still a little bit high. And clearly in this case, he was taking medicines, but they weren't sufficiently controlling his symptoms. Also, his anxiety and depression subscales were highest in elevation. This was elevated at 24. Again, that's an indicator of somebody who is not aggressive or hostile or suspicious of my examination, but is giving more sort of genuine information, more and more open to my examination.
Now, you also mentioned that you did the Montgomery-Asperg Depression Rating Scale.
Yes, sir. This is like I said, a depression rating scale. So the overall score range, the maximum score one could get is 60, and ranges between 0 to 6 is normal, 7 to 19 is mild depression, 20 to 34 is moderate depression, and greater than 34 is severe depression. So Mr. Eric Campbell's MADRS score was 32, which indicates that his depression symptoms had only been partially treated, as he was still in the upper level of the moderate depression range.
And now, Dr. Chaudhry, you mentioned the Violence Risk Appraisal Guide.
Yes, sir.
What is that?
The Violence Risk Appraisal Guide is the instrument that I said. This is not exactly a test. This is not something based on what I can ask an individual. This is really based on the aggregate of their history, of their past history, of their behavior as a child, of their parents' history. Were the parents married or not? Was there a parent who was a substance abuser or not? It involves the child's behavior, the individual's behavior as a child in school, in elementary school, as well as any prior history of legal charges. So this is, like I said, it's a scale that is designed to sort of give a broad brushstroke image of what this individual's past history is, and it's basically an appraisal guide for risk of violence.
And are some of the features of that appraisal guide beyond the person's control, like
yes,
parents'
absolutely.
activity and things like that?
Yes, and that's what creates the limitation of it. I think it's an important and useful tool to have it's sort of like putting together a puzzle. So this is one of the puzzle pieces, and I would be remiss if I didn't use this tool to create a fuller image. But I think that the limitation of this scale is that it doesn't change over the course of your lifetime, because you can't change your behavior of what you did in elementary school. You can't change whether or not your parents were married. You can't change whether or not your parent was a substance abuser. So this is something that doesn't change over time, but it is an important thing to have as part of the overall picture of the assessment.
Now, there was the Falstein mental status exam. I'm not sure we mentioned that one before, and what is that?
This is a test of memory and cognition at the time of the examination. This is a fairly commonly used test. A lot of hospitals will use this as a routine cognition memory test in, in individuals with Alzheimer's or other forms of cognitive disorders or dementia. And it's a very sensitive test in the sense that if an individual is, suffering a head injury, and at the day of the head injury they're not really able to perform that well, but over the course of time, this is a test that changes very quickly and rapidly, and is something that you can use to measure a person's progression over time. In the case of Mr. Eric Campbell, he scored a 29 out of 30. Indicating no evidence of impaired cognition at the time of the testing.
And finally, the clinician-administered post-traumatic stress disorder scale. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, sir. The clinician-administered post-traumatic stress disorder scale is considered the gold standard for identifying presence of post-traumatic stress disorder. It also is a tool that can identify the current presence versus the lifetime presence. It also identifies the severity if such a condition is present, and it identifies whether or not there are associated features. In terms of, sometimes people have PTSD where the bulk of their features are related to things like flashbacks. Sometimes the bulk of their features are related to avoidance features, amnesia, losing touch with reality. And so this is a test that is very thorough in that sense. It's 30 items. It takes about an hour or sometimes more to administer the test. It's a pretty big deal.
What were your findings? Did you give this test to Mr. Campbell?
Yes, I did. And I'm very glad I did, because, like I said earlier, he did not express a lot of these symptoms to me during my interviews with him. In fact, the score of, so let me just give you an idea. The score of 0 to 19 is asymptomatic. 20 to 39 is mild or subthreshold PTSD. 40 to 59 is moderate PTSD. 60 to 79 is severe PTSD, and greater than 80 is extreme PTSD. So Mr. Eric Campbell's scores on the scale are 65 for current symptoms, which is in the range of severe PTSD. His score was 80 for symptoms within the past month, and he scored 100 for lifetime symptoms of PTSD, which is well above the cutoff for extreme PTSD.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, I want to ask you a little bit. You keep saying PTSD, and what is PTSD? What is post-traumatic stress disorder?
So post-traumatic stress disorder is a complex psychiatric condition. It is something that not only involves a presence of symptoms, but it also is a condition in which people suffering from this will experience an absence of what is normal. And so it's difficult to diagnose. Most people with PTSD will not actually come to the doctor complaining of PTSD. They won't know what's wrong with them. This is a condition that occurs it can only be diagnosed in the presence of a single or recurring severely traumatic situations or events during which that individual experiencing the event is overwhelmed, is helpless, is horrified, and the prognosis, the risk of developing this is greater if this is recurring. So Post-traumatic stress disorder can happen as a result of obviously combat trauma. So people who are exposed to death, killing, brutality in combat settings, in war. The people who have had a single tour of duty are, certainly at risk of developing it. People who have had multiple tours of duty, those are the people who are at highest risk of developing. Other things that can trigger, that can cause post-traumatic stress disorder, other events, are things like natural disasters, hurricanes, mudslides, floods. Other things include rape or severe physical trauma, physical abuse, including events such as witnessing other people. So things like, if your child is, drowned in a river while you're watching and you're helpless there, you can't do anything. That's a horribly traumatizing event. So those are all circumstances that can trigger post-traumatic stress disorder.
Now, did you, Dr. Chaudhry, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Eric Campbell suffers, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty as to whether Eric Campbell suffers from a mental health disorder?
Yes, I do.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether he suffered from a mental health disorder at the time of the events in this case back in January 1st, 2015?
Yes, I do.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is that Eric Campbell suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder prior to the events that led to the present charges, and that the events that have led to these present charges have compounded the presence of post-traumatic stress disorder for Eric Campbell.
Now, let me ask you, Dr. Chaudhry, you mentioned that you reviewed a lot of information related to this case, and we're going to talk about some of those collateral sources. But I want to talk to you first about the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Were you the first person to diagnose, based on the information you've reviewed, were you the first person or doctor to diagnose Mr. Campbell with post-traumatic stress disorder?
No, sir, I was not.
And when are you aware was he originally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, the phrase post-traumatic stress disorder was found in the records from the psychiatrist at Central Prison. The symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are actually documented prior to that, from when Mr. Eric Campbell was a child.
So when you say he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder at Central Prison, who was that who originally diagnosed him? Do you remember?
Yes, I remember at least two names. One of them was Dr. Gabriella O'Connell. The other one was Dr. Newman.
And who are they? I mean, what's their role with Mr. Campbell? Are they are they people who work in sort of the capacity you're working in, or are they different?
No, sir, they're not evaluating him for the forensic purposes. They're actually treatment providers. These are individuals who have a patient-doctor relationship with Mr. Eric Campbell. These are psychiatrists who are employed at Central Prison Psychiatric Facility, and they were actually his treatment providers at that time.
And has he been treated for that disorder since he's been incarcerated pretrial?
Yes, sir, he has.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things you reviewed relating to Mr. Campbell's childhood. But first I want to talk to you, as part of your evaluation or as part of your testimony today, have you also reviewed the results of psychological report by Dr. Fox at Central Regional Hospital?
Yes, sir, I have.
And did Dr. Fox at Central, and is it your understanding that Dr. Fox was a person who evaluated Mr. Campbell on behalf of the state?
Yes, sir, she did.
Now, what was her findings, as you remember, related to malingering?
Dr. Fox, I'd say, conducted a really, her report was very thorough. She did conduct malingering testing in addition to conducting other psychometric tests, some of which actually have malingering scales built into the test. She did a very thorough job, and her findings indicated not only that Mr. Eric Campbell showed no evidence of malingering or falsifying or minimizing, exaggerating symptoms, but also that he had a significant elevation of the PK scale, which is known to be consistent with elevation in people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So the state's experts' findings were very similar, even though she used different tests. They were very similar to my testing findings.
Now, and when you say the state's expert, you mean the psychologist who did the testing?
Yes, sir, that's right. Dr. Fox.
Now, in relation to your evaluations, you've mentioned that you reviewed a lot of material. And I want to ask you about some specific, a lot of this material was given to you sort of as background information. Did you list in your report people, sort of witness statements that you reviewed?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, as part of your review, did you review statements provided to you by Greg that were taken regarding Greg Jurek?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what about Christy Nolan?
Yes, sir, I did.
And Shane Warman?
Yes, sir.
Did you review a number of or a myriad of other witness statements that were provided to you?
Yes, sir, I did.
How about what other kinds of specific information did you review that came to you from Eric Campbell's childhood? Let's start with the childhood first.
Most significantly, I reviewed records that were provided by the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. These included investigations on neglect and abuse of Mr. Eric Campbell and his brother, Mr. Nick Campbell, perpetrated by their father, Mr. Edward Campbell. This included psychological report both of Mr. Eric Campbell, but also of his brother, Mr. Nicholas Campbell, and a family assessment report, also conducted by the Department of Family Protective Services. But that was not all. I would have to say there were, at the time when I prepared this report, I believe you had provided me with maybe one or two instances. I think it was a period of 1 year from 2000 to 2001. What was really remarkable was that following my preparation of that report, I was sent an email by Mr. Durham that said there is additional information by the Texas Family Protective Services, and I was actually quite stunned to see the amount of material, the number of times that the family had been investigated. I think there were over 1,000 pages that were there in addition to what I had seen initially. So it was actually quite surprising and quite jarring, I would say.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, what did you find out about Eric Campbell's family through these records and the interviews about the sort of the makeup of his family when you were doing your review?
What I discovered was that it was a very complex and very unusual makeup of the family. That Eric was a young child had almost no memories of his mother before she was in a wheelchair. His main memories of her involve, that she was just there, and that they would need to brush her teeth, and she never really spoke. He really didn't have any other clear memories about his childhood, actually, which is remarkable. One of his very first memories that he described to me was being pistol whipped by his father in the head. And I believe he actually has a scar still of being 4 or 5 years old, just crying, blood being everywhere. Didn't know if there was anybody who could help him, just getting paper towels and holding them onto his head. This is a very different type of first memory than what most people would have. So the family circumstances were quite difficult, to say the least. It was also became evident that Mr. Ed Campbell had a very volatile personality and a very unpredictable relationship with the children, that there were times where he would be caring and loving, but also times that he would punish them without warning, sort of on the drop of a hat. They would get hit, and this is not just from the reports that I was provided by Mr. Eric Campbell. I mean, these are reports from his uncle, Mr. Greg Jurek, and
Object to that. Anything that it's hearsay.
I'm sorry, sir. So just materials that I reviewed that were provided, interviews from other informants.
Now, why is something that happened that far back in childhood relevant to your consideration in a case like this?
It's very relevant because the childhood is a time where an individual is starting to develop not only the actual brain development, but they're developing their relationships with people. For example, in Mr. Eric Campbell's case, his relationship with his father, but also in terms of his development of his personality. There are, what we know is that humans and even pets, we develop attachments to people. We develop attachments to each other. We develop attachments to our caregivers. And what we know is that for individuals who have very secure attachments, they feel like they are cared for unconditionally by the people who love them. You could be going through all sorts of difficult things, but your mom will always be there for you, or your dad will always be there for you. And in situations as what Mr. Eric Campbell was experiencing, his attachment was very disorganized. On the one hand, his attachment was that he cared about his dad, he wanted to please his dad. On the other hand, he was terrified of his dad, because if he did anything that his dad possibly construed was wrong, he was going to be beaten severely. So this was a very, and I think the other thing that's remarkable about the family, I should add, is that there were no other adults really in close proximity. So I've seen many cases like this where there are other adults. There are grandparents nearby, there's an uncle or an aunt, there might be a coach, or there might be, a neighbor but in Eric's family's case, he was very isolated. He wasn't having play dates. Or having sleepovers. He wasn't, going to Cub Scouts or playing Little League or anything. So these children were very isolated from other people who could have possibly seen what was going on. The people who did have a window into the life were interviewed and described very harsh circumstances. I think it's also remarkable that even before Miss Valerie Campbell became wheelchair bound, her brother describes a very also limited relationship with the children. So I'm not actually very clear that even in her presence that Mr. Eric Campbell actually was able to have a really strong, well-attached relationship with his mother. given the reported history of chronic substance use in both parents.
Now, you've talked a little bit about the relationships, but what, as it relates to, what is the impact of trauma on the brain? I mean, how does these traumatic experiences, how do they affect actual brain development from a psychiatric standpoint?
So there's actually, PTSD is one of the very well-studied conditions because it is remarkable that there are so many areas of biology that are impacted by the problems, by the experiences of post-traumatic stress disorder. So number one, we know that there are actual shrinkages of certain areas of the brain in individuals who have post-traumatic stress disorder, and that this is far more profound in early age of trauma as well as in repeated trauma. So there's a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and if there are several studies that show that there's an actual shrinkage of the part of the brain called the hippocampus in people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's also remarkable to see that following successful treatment of PTSD, those shrunken hippocampus images actually return to normal. So it's sort of like you can see it's like an x-ray where you see a broken bone, and then when you treat it, it heals. It actually looks better. So that's one really important thing. The other really important thing is that there is a change in brain cell relay mechanisms in certain centers of the brain, for example, in the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain. And so fear is one of the most basic instincts to life preservation. We're terrified, and so we do what needs to be done to stay alive. What we know is that for people who have severe chronic PTSD, this amygdala has hyperactivity. So the amygdala is flooding, is way more active in the same kind of situation that a person who doesn't have PTSD would be, of course it would be active, but this is, orders of magnitude different in a person who has PTSD. The third really important difference, so not just the brain structure and the brain cell relay systems, but the third thing is the actual rush of hormones. So we all know about the fight, flight, freeze response, right? When something stressful happens, our adrenaline kicks in, and that's what helps us to survive. What we know is that in individuals with PTSD, their baseline cortisol levels are lower than what a normal person is like. And we know that in conditions of stress, actually those adrenaline levels, that norepinephrine and epinephrine response is much more elevated in a person with PTSD than it would be in a person who doesn't have PTSD.
How do we know these things?
So there are hundreds and hundreds of research studies that have been confirming these findings.
And what impact does that have on a person in general who has post-traumatic stress disorder in relation to traumatic events or scary events?
Well, this is very important because what ends up happening for a person with post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is different than somebody who's just experienced a traumatic event. A person with post-traumatic stress disorder basically reorganizes their brain, their hormonal reactions, and these things are unconsciously being done, and also their behaviors, in which they're unconsciously reorganizing their lives. They're changing their behaviors, they're changing their personality style, they're changing how they interact with people as a result of doing anything that they can to avoid the triggering or the distress that comes with these. In addition to that, that's when there's nothing stressful happening. But in addition, under stressful conditions, when there's something terrible happening, their brain is not functioning the same way. Those relay mechanisms and the response to those high adrenaline levels is not functioning in the same way that it would for a person that doesn't have post-traumatic stress disorder. So it changes the individual's behavior and decision-making capacity, both at a conscious level and at an unconscious level and in a quiescent setting, but also in a high-stress setting.
Now, Dr. Chaudhry, you mentioned that the doctors at Central Prison diagnosed Mr. Eric Campbell with chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. You've described what that is. What was the basis of the post-traumatic stress that those doctors described in their diagnosis?
In their notes that they described the primary trigger, the primary trauma for a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder was related to the abuse he experienced at home at the hands of his father.
And now, when you diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder, would it be fair to say that you had more information than those doctors did?
Yes, sir, that's probably true.
And what was the basis of your diagnosis?
The basis of my diagnosis was the history that had been provided to Texas Family Protective Services, the substantiation of abuse and neglect that was found by the Texas Family Protective Services. In addition, there were psychological evaluations of Mr. Eric Campbell that demonstrated I believe the words were an excessive amount of fantasy and imagination that was detrimental and that would probably cause problems for him down the road.
Well, let's give that some context. When you say there was a psychological examination,
yes,
when
sir.
Was that psychological evaluation?
The psychological evaluation was conducted at the time when Mr. Edward Campbell was incarcerated and there was nobody available to take care of Eric and Nick.
Well, do you remember his age is my question. How old was he?
He was 8 years and 4 months of age.
Why was that finding significant to you?
It was a finding that was significant not only to me, but also to the psychologist who conducted the evaluation. And she remarked on that at least twice in her report. It's remarkable because what we know about human cognitive development, this is just how children think and how their stages of development occur, is that from ages there's sort of this age, that there's a stage in which children really engage in fantasy thinking and they believe that that's real. But that stage really ends around the age of 7 for the vast majority of children. And if it does go beyond that, it's minimal and it's transitory. So this is sort of where children are make-believe play kind of stuff, where they're sitting in a cardboard box, but they think it's a rocket ship. So what's remarkable is that Eric was 8.5 years old, and the extent of which he was experiencing this fantasy play, this fantasy escapist kind of thinking, was elevated compared with what one would expect for his age. And that the psychologist's impression was that he was escaping in this way and that this was detrimental to him. I think another thing that's remarkable is that at the same time his brother, Mr. Nicholas Campbell, underwent a psychological evaluation. Now he was 4 years older than Eric at the time of this evaluation, and presumably he had had 4 years of additional exposure to living in that home and in that family. And reading the reports that described his behavior and his responses was very remarkable for that these were blunted responses in which a child that age it was remarkable at which he was not able to respond. He was passive. He was sort of not responding in a manner. The other thing that was important was that at the same time of those assessments, the family assessment was conducted, and Mr. Edward Campbell's responses were deemed to be unreliable. And the people conducting the assessment had the impression that he was withholding information, he was pretending that things were the way that he said they were, when in fact they weren't. So he was actually not, the sort of falsifying scales on his testing were elevated. So he was not telling the truth.
Dr. Chaudhry, related to,
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our morning recess at this point during our luncheon recess, during our luncheon recess period. It is your duty not to talk among yourselves about this case. It's your duty not to talk to the parties, the witnesses, or the lawyers about anything at all. Further duty not to talk to anyone else, to allow anyone else to talk with you, to say anything in your presence about this case. If anyone communicates any information to you at all, you need to let the sheriff know about it when you come in. Don't do any individual research or investigation on your own about any issue touching on this trial. Stay away from your smartphone if it has anything to do with this case. And do not form or express any opinion about this case during this time. With that, while everyone else will remain seated, I will excuse the 17 of you and ask that you return and assemble in the jury room at 2:30 this afternoon. If that's your excuse.